Today I'm going to show you how I took last week's poppy paintings and explored them further. So by working from imagination and memory, I got quite different results. I ended up with something much more graphic than I expected. My goal was to paint looser and freer, and I certainly started out that way. The painting took many twists and turns that you'll see in the video before I get to the final result. I'm Pat from Scribner Art and Design. I love teaching and sharing my knowledge. I'm starting by putting paint down on this 10 by 10 inch gallery wrap canvas with a Liquitex paddle brush. It's one of the larger ones. I'm using orange and yellow fluid paints. This is a Demco brand. Adding some red in here. I am thinking about a poppy shape a little bit as I put this paint down, but I'm also just trying to cover my background. I'm working fast. I don't want to labor it at this point, and just trying to get some juice down on the canvas. Working wet into wet. Now you can safely work wet into wet if you keep your colors on one side of the color wheel. Coming in with a catalyst wedge here, just to smooth some of this out, move it around a little bit. And now I'm using the catalyst wedge just to draw in some of my form here. I'm using a Mark All pencil by Stabilo to further draw in some lines, just loosely working to try and establish what may be my shape. A Stabilo Mark All is water soluble. I'm bringing some pure white in here, and again you can see I'm working wet on wet, so I'm getting a new color blending right on the canvas. So working a little bit negative around my shape. Now I am working totally from imagination and memory here. I want to get something that looks like a poppy, but I don't want to get caught up on copying a picture, a photograph, or something I have done previously. So I'm just trying to work fast, stay loose, coming in with a palette knife, just moving some of this paint around a little bit. So I really like to use these small studies as a place to experiment and explore more than getting caught up in the fact that I'm trying to make a masterpiece. I like to work fast. Often I put on a time limit and try and stick with that, so 20 to 25 minutes. Adding some dark in. This is a dioxazine purple mixed with anthracnone blue. Again, I'm still working with fluid paints. Coming back in around with some white again. So really just exploring and playing and seeing where I can take this. Using the catalyst wedge here again. I love this tool. It's a great way to flatten your paint out, scrape, make marks back into it, blending. It's one of the tools that I do use a lot. Coming back in now with that Mark All pencil. Just defining some shape again. Turning my painting around to get a different perspective. So I really want this to take on an abstract look more than something that's realistic. And I don't know how far I can push the boundaries with it this first time I'm doing it, but it may be something I explore some more. Adding some light in here just so I can put on some lighter tones on top. Picking up some paint from underneath because it's still wet. And now I'm scratching back into that wet paint. I'm using a graphite stick for this, trying a orange woody Stabilo as well. So when you find that you're getting kind of uptight and a little bit too precious, bringing the child back in and doing some scribbling and mark making can be really valuable. I mixed up a complement here in blue, just adding a little bit around the edge. And again, the paint underneath is wet, so I'm picking some of that up. If you put some paint in one place, a color, put it elsewhere in your painting. You want to keep the relationship going, and you want to make sure the eye is continually moving around the painting. Often paintings go through this messy middle or ugly stage when you're working this way, and maybe when you're working from photos too, but I find when I'm working more intuitive and from memory, and I don't have that roadmap, that often it can go through a kind of a messy middle, and then you have to try and bring it back to something. So here I'm just carving in some marks like leaves and going back in around some of my form, again with that Stabilo Markall. Now this is water soluble, and it did smear some in my painting. So I'm just mixing up here kind of a mauve color that I'm going to add a little bit in. Just do some dots in the center part of this poppy. Again, I'm not trying to make this realistic, so just adding, trying different things. And this is how we learn. So by just committing to a smaller size that you can play on, that's not as precious, or even using paper, can be so valuable. So I really encourage you to try doing that and work with the same subject matter over and over. So I put some yellow right on top of this blue, and I've got an intense, very intense green mixed right on the canvas. So I'm wiping some of that back. It's a little bit too crazy. And this is the thing, we don't necessarily know until we try whether something is going to work or not going to work. And that's how we learn. And by working on a smaller surface, you're not using so many of your supplies up, and you're not going to feel like it's as precious as if you were working on a really larger painting. So just adding some magenta in this painting. Again, still sticking with the fluid paints. I spent a lot of time in my garden this week cleaning up and manicuring and pruning, just kind of that big spring clean. And it certainly gave me lots of time to ponder and listen to several podcasts as I was working. And I did make a vision board. I started one, and this time I did it with digital format. It's the first time I've done a digital vision board. And it was actually quite fun and easy. I usually do the old-fashioned method of cut and paste from magazines, but I just didn't have any magazines, and often I can't find the pictures that match up with my visions anyway. So if that's something you're interested in knowing more about, leave a comment and let me know. So here I'm doing some asemic writing in the background I made, and unfortunately I wasn't really thinking. I was in the heat of the moment here in my flow state, and my canvas is upside down. So as much as I love this, it does look a little unusual to have the writing upside down if my poppy is going to be this way. So as you'll see further on in the video, I do end up changing this because it is rather bothersome. So just trying some different color down in this area, and again blending right into the canvas, working wet and wet. Now I like how that works with the background, but not liking the upside down writing. Trying to get some variety in my shapes of the flower petals and also in the colors and the values. Coming in here with some blue, some teal, just adding a little bit of accents in places. I find using a complementary color always pops things up. So I encourage you to try that. I'm just coming in to some of the marks I had made earlier here and kind of amplifying them a little bit. Adding a little bit more light in some areas. So I like building up layers in my work. I think it gives lots of interest and history when you work this way, and it's not necessarily once and done. It's not all perfect and perfect shading. For sure, it probably takes up more paint as you go, but I do myself like the results better. Although I can appreciate the more realistic way of working, it's just not how I'm happy about doing it. So I've decided to let that background go, and I'm painting it a dark blue, anthracnone blue. And this is going to dramatically change how the painting looks. my original idea was to cover it up and then paint over it with a light color and scratch back into it. But when I put the dark on, I kind of was enjoying it and thought, well, why don't I just scratch back into this and see what happens? So that's what I did, and I ended up leaving it like that. But there are so many options, and this is the thing, that you want to just keep trying things. So here I'm doing this, I'm grading the right way up, and I'm just using a bamboo skewer. That gives some interest in the background. I'm coming back in now with some heavy body paints. It's a little thicker, trying to build up my paint in this painting. And there's some places where my Markall pencil made it a little bit dirty looking. So I'm trying to cover over some of that. May not have been the best thing to use for my marking. Another time I may just stick with a pencil. So it's just graphite and it won't move around like that. So still working wet on wet, adding some more vibrancy. This is a little stay wet palette I've got here on the side, and it's usually one I use when I go out plein air painting because it's small. But I put the paint in and it stays really nice and fresh, and I can show you my mixing on the screen with the smaller palette. Another thing when you're painting like this is knowing when to quit, when you feel satisfied with what you've got. And, you know, you have to stop at some point. You can look at it again another day with fresh eyes and maybe decide that it wasn't finished. But don't overwork it. Don't labor it to death. Try and stop when it still has some freshness to it. So again, use your colors around your canvas. Don't just put something in one area. So I've decided to let this color on the side go and just come around the whole flower. Coming back in with a little bit of light on the top of this petal. So at this point, I'm really just finessing, and I have to be very cautious that I don't keep going too long here, because it will start to get an overworked feeling. So I'm just using my little brush, coming back in with a little bit of teal paint in areas, not wanting to outline the whole poppy, but to give it a little bit of oomph around the edge. Just a separation from that dark background. So I'm adding some yellow over top of this. That's going to push it to a brighter green that I feel works better with the actual flower. And I'm coming back in onto the centers of the poppy with some of that green, just to give it more of a relationship and make that area pop out a little. If you're enjoying my videos, give them a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel, considering sharing with your friends. Thanks for watching. Leave any comments or questions that you have. I'd love to hear from you.